much indeed for that introduction. Thank you again for your hospitality. It's been the most amazing, it is the most amazing venue. I wish I used the past tense. It's fantastic to be here. We had a cracking day yesterday, and I know we're going to build on the spirit of innovation that we launched so successfully yesterday. And actually, I think in the session we're about to have here on stage, we'll be exploring some of those issues around when the beneficiation to the local supply chain will be seen after all the fine rhetoric and fancy talk that we had yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason I'm standing here is just to wait for the furniture to come on stage. It's a delight to see you all here this morning. I know there's a huge amount going on. It's Friday at the end of the first week. Everybody's absolutely knackered, and so the fact you're here is a pleasant surprise and a delight for all of us in the organising committee who saw an empty marquee about half an hour ago and began to worry. But it's great to have you all here. We're going to move now seamlessly into our first session, and I'm going to ask Karen Villamoria and Laura Sands to come and join me on stage. Laura, if you take the green chair, Karen, if you go further down next to
Thank you.
There we go. And then we can sort of tilt to face each other. There we go. How's that? Great stuff. Well, good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. It's an enormous pleasure to be here with two particular friends of mine. One of the fantastic things that you can do when you organise a conference is to ask your friends to come and join you, and it's an immense pleasure. And in fact, but the reason we're sitting on this stage today is entirely due to Karen, who, when I last saw him in September, had just spoken at the Borders Book Festival. For those who you know, held along at Traquair on the other side of Scotland. For those of you who haven't been, I'd recommend going next year. And he put into my mind that in as much as the conferences we go to and events that we attend tend to be quite formal and, like yesterday morning, the First Minister, and there's a lot of ceremony, actually often you can get better value and more interesting discussions just sitting down alongside each other in a series of relatively comfy chairs to have a good chat. So I'm delighted that you're both here. By way of introduction, I think I've known Laura since, well, for at least a decade, since you were a Member of Parliament. Laura's former chair of the European movement in the UK, but more importantly for today's discussion, a director of the Energy Systems Catapult. We're going to be exploring the impact on the UK's energy systems and global energy systems shortly. And Karen is the president of CBI UK, but I think if I just call you a serial entrepreneur, would that be permissible? And in a city with probably more Indian restaurants per head than any other in the UK, the founder of Cobra Beer. So it's a delight to have you both with us today. I wonder if I might start, given that we're sitting in a tent looking at a series of other tents across the river. There is the Blue Zone. To my mind, it's actually been quite a good week in the Blue Zone. I think expectations were almost in the basement when we started. The good old British media doing their best to play down the fantastic opportunity for UK hosting, with Italy hosting COP26. But we've had a succession of breakthrough announcements, starting on Monday and all the way through the great, extraordinary announcement on coal yesterday. You've both been here for a few days. You've both been paying very close attention. Laura, what's your sense of the mood or the sense of momentum? Here we are on Friday of the first week of COP.
Well, firstly, Adam, and thank you so much for inviting me, and what a great event, and wonderful to be with Karen, so thank you. I have one emotional point, and that is, it is incredibly sobering and humbling to be at COP and just walk around a corner and see an Amazonian tribal leader, where we actually start to really understand this is an international issue and we are touching communities that are really super vulnerable around the world. So this has a very high purpose. I agree with you, Adam. I have to say, Monday morning thinking this was going to be a climate trade show rather than actually a series of quite substantive statements. I've been really surprised by certain things and excited. The Indian target, not so much the 2070, but the 2030 target is quite super impressive.
Yeah.
Challenging, impressive. Coal, Poland. Who put their hand up and thought that Poland at the beginning of the week was going to make a commitment on coal? And also the methane and forestry stuff is really, really interesting. Actually, to be frank, the big challenge is not in some ways the commitments at this moment. It's going to be the evaluation as it goes forward. But listen, I don't think we can be on the back foot or pessimistic.
Yeah.
One thing that I would say, an absolute tribute to Karen's members, but also the wider business community, they have also set some very, very serious targets for government to meet. With the combination of business and the combination of consumers' demand actually have been the leaders in many ways, dragging some governments a little bit kicking and screaming to catch up with the ambition that actually business and the customer has. So I'm feeling very upbeat. Thank you, Adam.
Well, that's great to have that sense of momentum. And you touched on a really interesting point. And Karen, we had that announcement from Rishi Sunak midweek on accountability, on transparency, on business reporting. But there was a bit of a wobble a couple of weeks ago where it looked as though the corporate sponsors of COP were getting slightly huffy because they weren't getting the number of blue zone passes. But that's all passed. And it looks now as if, to pick up Laura's point, as if the presence of business, the presence of your members and many others, has really driven that, given governments the extra impetus to reach and be more ambitious. Is that your sense of what's happened this week?
Adam, absolutely. Congratulations you and mainstream all that you've achieved and are doing in this space globally, which is terrific. And Laura, great to be with you. I just want to build on what you've said. The COP veterans and who've been going to these things for a while have made one big observation. And this is the standout for this COP26. I think this COP26 is actually a watershed. Because 6 years ago at Paris, there were still many people who were skeptical. They didn't believe in it. It was attended mainly by NGOs. Nothing wrong with NGOs. I mean, that's this time, business has been here in a big way, and that's the big difference. And it's gone from skepticism to now belief, and that belief has been there across the board, and in particular from business's point of view. And I was born and brought up in India, and my favorite saying of Mahatma Gandhi is your beliefs. You've got to believe. Beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits form your character, and your character determines your destiny. So if you believe, it's going to happen.
Okay.
And then that belief leads to commitment, which leads to action. So first is raising awareness. That's happened. Now here's the test of it. With the CBI, working with Deloitte, we've got the Goal 13 platform that we've been working on, which is fantastic. Look it up. We did a survey last month, and I'm going to give you two results. One, 79% of businesses see climate change as a mega trend. Now that's belief. And wait for this. 89% of businesses have at least one climate change related target. So now we're setting ourselves targets. Nobody's forcing us to do it. We're doing it ourselves. And what gets measured gets done. So we're on absolutely the right path. I'm just as optimistic as you are, because now is the time for action. And the challenge, which we can discuss, is this word that everyone keeps talking about, is transition.
Yep.
This is not switching one thing off and switching one thing on. I'm sorry, a lot of the sort of very well-intentioned campaigners who want everything to switch over tomorrow, that's not realistic. We've got to transition to this. And we've seen in our own country here, with your wind power, which is fabulous. The cost of wind power now is so much more affordable than it was before. Solar power has gone down by 15% a year since the 1990s. So, if the costs are going to go down, but if the wind doesn't blow, you need something else. You need a backup. So we need an integrated system.
Yes.
We need, whether it's modular nuclear, whether it's hydrogen down the line, whether it's all forms of other renewable power, But we're not there yet, and it's going to take time. And that transition is the challenge.
So, Karen, you've neatly teed up Laura, because the energy systems catapult exists, I presume, to look at that transition and identify the routes that we're going to take. So, Laura, to your mind, because I know you've been thinking and writing a lot about this, how do we know the transition's happening? You know, it's like, how do we describe the elephant in the room? What's your sense of how that transition is happening and the leading elements of it?
Well, I think we can certainly see from what I would call the power, the renewable power percentages that we're experiencing in the UK. So I think we've got evidence on that. We do have some of these issues around sort of wind deserts and, you know, dark days that aren't delivering us the solar. But we do have a lot of tools in the box, and I think this is the point. So I think that in many ways governments have been looking at and sort of saying, okay, fine, we need absolutely everything at the generation side, and we need a shed load more renewable energy. So there's not a question about that. I actually have a little analogy from the food sector. And that is, if we talk about, one of the areas that we haven't really invested in is storage. So before refrigeration in food, we lost about 60% of our food before it got to the plate. What do we have? We have all sorts of refrigeration vectors, frozen food, flash freezing, fridges in your home. Right? These are all storage vectors for energy, exactly the same. So hydrogen is a frozen food, long-term storage. You've got flash freezing, which is EV cars. You've got, in many ways, a really important component of this whole optimization of your wonderful green electrons, whether it be across a time period where we haven't got wind, or whether it be a just-in-time balancing system. So I would say that actually the next area of our transformation, rather than transition, but transformation, is in the storage world, but actually looking at the journey that the food sector went through. And there's one last point, and that is, before we had fridges in our homes, or if we didn't have fridges in our homes, supermarkets would have to be 3 times the size they are today.
Yeah.
So you start to think about how we can hedge, extend the life cycle, the life period of the electron right way through the system. We start to get to a really optimized energy sector. We start to pull down prices. And in many ways, Adam and your teams, actually you move, again another little food analogy, from just being a milk farmer to being a cheesemaker, adding value right way through this whole process. And I think it's very exciting.
But you see the point you made earlier, absolutely. The point and can it be done? Well, look to the past. So with India setting this target, a country of 1.4 billion people, okay, 2070, park that, at least there's a target, which is good. But to cut the interim target to reduce carbon intensity of the economy by 45% by 2030. I mean, extraordinary. That's hugely ambitious. Now, look at the past. I started Cobra Beer 3 decades ago. In those 3 decades, we've cut our emissions by almost half in this country since 1990.
Amazing.
And the economy has grown by over 70%. I mean, Cobra Beer has grown much faster than that, but that's another point. And the other thing is, I mean, you know,
let's not forget
with wind, we've got the target now to go to 40 gigawatts offshore by 2030, but in the past decade, we've done 10 gigawatts. So how are we going to do 30 gigawatts in less than 10 years now? And I think we can do it.
It is that sense of the real ramping up. I want to come back, pick up the point that Chris made in his impassioned introduction, because there's a point for you, Karen. But on the, if I can continue to extend the food analogy.
I do apologise.
No. I think it's a fantastic
food
analogy.
And drink analogy.
Food and drink analogy.
Definitely.
Absolutely. But it's all about, in that sense, it's all about supply chains. And you know, now you expect, as you wander into your local supermarket, we won't talk about Brexit, we won't talk about trouble with lorry drivers, but you expect to find produce from all around the world, just-in-time deliveries and all the rest of it. The next session we have after this is on interconnection, on building a European supergrid, about taking those electrons when they're generated in the far northwest Atlantic, off the coast of Ireland, in the Baltic, but bringing them over superconductive transmission networks to consumers in the Ruhr Valley or in Hungary or wherever they are. And it's the same. It is exactly the same. It's a product, and you're building a new transport mechanism to bring it into people's homes. And much of what we were talking about yesterday, it was about the engineering and the big and all of you just spoke, Karen, about those targets and the extraordinary amount of investment we're going to have to put into building this fast. But we haven't brought the consumers with us. We haven't yet found a language to, the discussion at the moment about heat and the decarbonisation of heat is about ripping out boilers and the expense. But if you talk in terms of fridges and supermarkets and food and beer, then it becomes much more tangible and much more realisable. But I wonder, Karen, if I could pick up the point Chris made. Here we are, if we were here 100 years ago in this spot, we'd been surrounded by the docks and the shipyards. Clyde Built was synonymous with the best in engineering globally, and yet Chris is looking at this new industrial renaissance coming in with the advent of further low carbon decarbonisation of the economy. And yet, how do we ensure that investment is here in the UK with your members, with the Malin Group, that we're actually making things here, employing people, bringing people through with the skills they need to become the engineers of the future?
We need to do that, but we've also got to accept that we have been living more and more in this interconnected, globalized world. And I think this, going back to protectionism, which was starting to happen, I chaired the B7 before the G7 as president of the CBI in May. And we had Dr. Ngozi, the new head of the WTO. And she was amazing. And one of our members said the WTO is in the last chance saloon. And she said, we've got to roll back this protectionism. We've got to carry on dealing on a global basis. So I think we must maintain that. But how can we do more here? Yeah. And I think we can. And a lot of it is down to investment. And this is out of the pandemic, the government's been phenomenal in supporting £400 billion and saving jobs in the economy. Unemployment is relatively very low compared with what people expected it to be after a huge global crisis. Now the investment needs to be there going ahead, not only for the recovery from the pandemic, but also investment in what we're talking about here. Massive amounts of investment. Now you've seen all these figures, 130 trillion is going to be available, but that investment's got to be deployed. And linked to that is investment in innovation and R&D. And we invest 1.7% of GDP in R&D and innovation. Germany and America, for example, 2.7, 2.8%. Forget Israel, off the charts at 4%. Yeah. If we do that 1% extra per year, that's £20 billion more a year, targeted at things like climate change, renewables. Just imagine. And we've got next week, on the 11th, I'm very excited, because as Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, we have the world-leading railway department, literally in the world. And we've produced the world's first retrofitted hydrogen-powered train. And it's here in Glasgow. And I'm going to be chairing a meeting on this train on the 11th, on a moving hydrogen-powered train. So we've done it here in Britain first. So I think that's the way to go.
But absolutely agree. And can I just say, fantastic journey that will be on a train, on a hydrogen train. I think we've really got to sort of lean into this, because actually it's not, I mean, I'm a climate change sort of semi-activist, but it's actually about modernising our economy. It's not just about the climate change issue. It is about being more efficient, doing more with less, optimizing system design, renewing our old-fashioned thinking. I mean, there are all sorts of strange 19th century sort of anomalies in our economy, in our industry, that really need a huge sort of housekeeping. There needs to be a lot of clean out. But I actually think, particularly for your members, it's very exciting, this new, in many ways, much more dynamic but much more interconnected world of energy, because energy has been a very small world, and you know your members who are involved in energy. There are 400 people, more or less, who run the energy sector, the old energy sector, and they all know each other's golf handicap. all right? This is how intimate they all are. We are moving to an energy system that is about 100 million actions and assets, right? So every EV car can do two things. Every heat pump can do two things. Industry are going to be both, you know, storing, generating, and drawing energy off the system. This is something that instead of the 400 of your members who are involved in this is all your members. And that's what's very exciting. And the dynamics about the sort of medium size and SME side is going to be really important. And your point about R&D is crucial. What we really must do is actually we've got quite a lot of the components to decarbonize our economy. What we haven't got is the deployment.
Yeah.
And it's the D of the R, which is actually some of the problem. Because you say Birmingham, I mean, doing brilliant things. Universities doing fabulous stuff. How do we get some of the 400 to start to deploy some of those sort of, in many ways, innovations that are coming from those medium-sized companies? Large companies and medium companies, they find it very difficult to talk to each other.
So now here's one of the ways that we feel very, at the CBI, we produced in the middle of the pandemic, our economic vision for the next decade. We called it Seize the Moment. And we've identified 700 billion pounds of opportunity in the next decade in 6 pillars, quantified, broken down. And of course, one of the big pillars is decarbonization. And the other pillar is regional and in government lingo, leveling up.
Yeah.
Now this leveling up, we say clusters. There's big potential for clusters. Now we all know the famous clusters in the world, Silicon Valley and the Boston, MIT, Harvard cluster. Well, in the UK, probably the most famous cluster is the Cambridge University cluster, which started off with tech and Acorn Computers and ARM. And of course now with the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, it's Oxford and AstraZeneca, but where's AstraZeneca headquartered? In Cambridge, because the life sciences cluster. Now we can do the same thing around the country.
Totally.
I'll give you an example. I went to Teesside, and we got this dynamic mayor, Ben Houchin, who's 34 years old, and he's just been re-elected. And he wants to bring in investment to Teesside, and a region of less than 1 million people, without a single city. It's got Middlesbrough, it's got Hartlepool. And he's got great plans for things like wind power and innovation. Take another example. I was on a panel earlier this week relating to Humberside. Now, this is how it happens. On that panel, you have Hull, I'm not pronouncing it correctly, I believe you're not meant to pronounce the H, so Hull. And so you had the leader of the council, you had Baroness Bosomley, my colleague in the House of Lords, who's the Chancellor of Hull University. You had Lakshman of Reckitt, whose origins are from Hull, and they've just invested £100 million in Hull. You had the president of CBI, we're very prominent. You had EY, senior partner, the head of the UK, Alison, for EY, the only Big Four firm that has an office over there. And everyone together, working together to get that cluster going. And that's the way to do it.
And the driver for that cluster, he says, bringing us back to the present, was the Mainstream and Siemens partnership that won the Hornsea Zone in round 3, and then drove Siemens' decision to invest and build their blade factory and you know, to see this catalog, we'll later on, I need unfortunately to bring our session to a close, but we'll see later on this morning, and when our discussion turns to Wave and Tidal, the huge opportunities for the furthest parts of the United Kingdom, the Orkneys, Shetland, and the immense opportunities for investment in parts of the UK. And we see this globally as well. We see it in South Africa, we see it in Chile. I mean, the opportunity for Chile in the Atacama Desert, the most irradiated place on the planet, generating the cheapest electricity anywhere, for Chile to become a hydrogen superpower of the 21st century. And these are transformational trends. We began our session talking about them. I wonder if I can ask you, just to, as we draw the threads of this conversation together, just to give us your very simple takeaway from this week, whether it's in terms of a thing that has happened or a moment, a sort of an aha moment for you, or in terms of technology. What are you taking away from Glasgow? Karen, perhaps if I can start with
first?
you. Yeah.
Okay. One thing I can say is that every single event I've taken part in, including just now, I've learned. And another of my Mahatma Gandhi sayings that I love is live as if you're going to die tomorrow, learn as if you're going to live forever. And you know, this is what this has been, a learning experience. I tell you, one of the aha facts, I was on a panel with Indonesia. 1 gigawatt of solar generates 7.4 jobs. And 1 gigawatt of coal generates 1 job. This is about jobs, jobs, and jobs. Your film said it earlier on as well.
I think you might find it's a megawatt rather than a gigawatt.
Sorry,
so it'll be
megawatt,
1,000 times
megawatt,
the number.
megawatt.
But it's all
I
right.
meant megawatt,
No,
not kilowatt.
but it's
megawatt.
the same. It's the same principle. It's exactly the same principle.
Yeah, it's a factor of 7 times is basically the point.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just been very optimistic, and I have to say again, this is optimism because I see business really driving things forward. I was talking to the minister from Jordan, and actually one of the interesting things as well is we must also not be too arrogant about. So a lot of countries come to the UK and they sort of say, so you've organised your energy system like this, and we must do the same, and blah blah blah. And my point is that actually some of these new countries, emerging countries, but not necessarily, not really emerging, but changing their energy system, they can leapfrog. Now, we actually have the technology to leapfrog. We, though, have to do all the retrofit. Let's not trap some of these fabulous countries with great, great ambitions in some of our 19th century thinking. So I want to be modern tomorrow, in the future. And maybe one of the things we need to learn from is we need to plan from the future, because incrementalism probably is not going to get us to 1.5.
You're so right, and you're so prescient, because the next panel we're going on to is the technology of the future today, when we come to discuss interconnection and superconductivity. And I think, Karen, one of your colleagues has just taken our photograph, which is even better, because I was going to ask one of my team to do it. But as long as they can share the image with us, it's great, because it's a record of the fact you were with us today to kick us off on day 2. Laura, Karen, can I thank you so much for your time? I know you're both super busy people, and it was really, really good of you to come.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very
But
much.
can I ask you all
Thank you.
thank our panelists?